You don't notice how quiet Sierra Valle really is until a phone won't ring back. It's just before 7 on a cold weekday morning when a man named Benjamin Rowan dials 911 from the shoulder of a cul-de-sac. He's parked outside a single-story desert home with sun-bleached stucco, a wind chime that doesn't move, and a porch light that's still on long after sunrise. He tells dispatch he's worried about his sister, Elaine Rowen, 66 years old, widowed, the sort of person who keeps appointments 30 minutes early and dog food stacked in neat rows, labels facing out. He called her last night. He called her again at dawn. Both times, the line died before the first ring. He left a note yesterday, folded once, his handwriting precise, the way a former engineer keeps his life from spinning, and slid it into the seam of her front door. That note is still there. Her sedan is still in the driveway, angled the way she always parks, nose pointed outward, ready to leave quickly even though she almost never does. Nothing about the picture suggests an emergency. And that, Benjamin says quietly, is the part he cannot shake. Sierra Valle Police Department arrives fast, 2 units, quiet radios, the easy choreography of officers who have done this 100 times and also know any one of those times might not be routine. The lead is a patient type with sand-colored hair and coffee he never quite gets to drink. He asks about medications, friends, patterns. Benjamin answers what he can. Elaine worked years at the post office, retired, kept to herself more after her husband passed and the family suffered a second loss they don't talk about in detail. She fills her time with small projects, a rescue mutt named Pepper, and a rental house next door she's been trying to clean out. Nothing dramatic. Just life, faithfully lived. The neighbor across the street, Sandra Cole, hustles over in a wool cardigan and house slippers, cheeks pink from the morning air. She's the one who watches the block without trying to look like she's watching it. She says Elaine never sleeps late, never leaves Pepper alone long, never ignores a call from Benjamin. Pepper barks sometimes at coyotes, but Sandra hasn't heard him since yesterday. That, she says, feels strange. The officers walk the perimeter first. The desert yard is tidy, ocotillo trimmed back, river rock raked in steady arcs, a hose coiled so precisely it could be a product photo. To the left of the porch is a slatted gate leading to the side yard, it's latched but not locked. Behind the house, a sliding door sits shut, blinds half drawn. On the right, a small metal screen door hangs a fraction off its catch, not enough to call forced, just enough to ask a question you can't yet answer. They try the front door. Locked. They tap the glass and call her name through the frame. Ms. Rowen, this is the police. Are you okay? Nothing. Not even Pepper. An officer glances down and spots the note still wedged in place, Benjamin's block letters visible through the paper. He takes a photo before they ease the door using a caretaker key Benjamin kept for emergencies like the sort you never need, until the morning you do. The smell inside is ordinary, citrus cleaner, dry air, the faintest memory of brewed coffee. No overturned lamps, no drawers yanked. There are lists on the counter, Elaine's lists, clipped and dated, grocery staples, call the utility company, remind Benjamin to check the swamp cooler, remember to ask the locksmith about the rental next door. The thermostat reads 68. A mug sits on a cork coaster, ring of coffee dried halfway down the inside, as if someone got distracted and meant to come back. A small dog bowl waits by the back door. It's dry. There's no scratch on the wood, no anxious paw marks, none of the signs Pepper leaves if he's shut in for too long. Benjamin pinches the bridge of his nose and looks at the fridge, photos of Elaine with a quiet smile, Benjamin at a backyard grill, a faded postcard of the Grand Canyon held under a cactus magnet. The postcard has a sticky note on it, Sierra Valle Library Book Drive, Saturday 10 a.m. It's Thursday. The search is deliberate. They move room to room, using the cadence that splits the difference between efficiency and respect. The bedroom is made. The closet holds 3 weeks of laundry that never got to become laundry because Elaine folds things before they can wrinkle. The bathroom counter is square with a pill organizer, the kind that says the day of the week in blue letters, all doses intact through Wednesday. On the desk in the spare room is an envelope labeled locksmith, rental, a yellow pad with names and dates, and a small key ring with tags that read main/rental/shed. One key tag is missing. Which one? Nobody says out loud for a moment. In the living room, Benjamin stands in front of the window, arms crossed, as if he can hold the house together by will. He points to a crocheted afghan draped over the arm of the couch and says it's older than both of them, made by their mother back in Clearview County before anyone could imagine they would move this far south in search of white skies that stay honest. He's talking to keep from listening to the deeper sound rising in his chest. Back on the porch, Sandra hovers behind the tape line, offering details as they surface. Yesterday, she says, late morning, she saw Caroline, that's Caroline Dane, the ex-daughter-in-law who used Elaine's rental next door, hauling boxes out to a truck with a friend, Megan. Caroline's boy, Evan, came and went with a backpack. There was nothing loud about it. Just movement, and the tense quiet that comes when a place shifts from ours to no longer. Sandra didn't see Elaine outside then. But she's seen Elaine handle uncomfortable things before. She's steady, Sandra says. Even when her voice shakes, her hands don't. The lead officer thanks her. He asks about cars. Sandra says she knows the usual, Elaine's sedan, Benjamin's truck, the blue pickup Megan drives when it runs. She didn't notice anything else. People in Sierra Valle, she says, notice and don't at the same time. That's what keeps the peace. At the rental next door, the officers pause at the threshold. The garage door is rolled halfway up, a cardboard city inside, mattresses, totes with cracked lids, the fossil record of a life that didn't move as a whole, just in chunks. The air smells like dust and lemon solvent. There's a cleaning machine tucked beside a stack of paint trays. A coil of extension cord hangs on a hook. Nothing screams. But nothing calms. They knock. Caroline appears, shoulders squared, hair pulled into a tight tie that announces competence the way some people wear uniforms. She explains she's finishing the move, shows a few text fragments that prove she and Elaine had planned to swap keys this weekend. Her voice is flat in the way a person speaks when she's trying not to say too much in front of strangers and will later wish she'd said less. Megan leans in the doorway behind her, eyes darting, a smile that doesn't reach anything important. Evan passes in the hall, hoodie up, glances down, and keeps going. The officers keep it professional. They ask to look around. They note the boxes sorted by room, the kitchen counters wiped, the blinds already down. One of them bends to tighten a loose outlet cover by habit and straightens without comment. You can learn a lot in a move out, what a family values, what a family fears, what a family hides. Today, they log the basic details and tell Caroline they may need to return with a formal warrant if Ms. Rowen remains missing by midday. Caroline nods fast, too fast, maybe, and then steadies. She says she understands. It's a word people use when they don't. When the officers regroup at the curb, Detective Mark Callen arrives, plain suit, badge tucked near his belt, a notebook already open. He listens more than he talks. It's the most useful skill a detective owns in a town this size. He asks Benjamin to walk him through the last conversation with Elaine, time, tone, any mention of appointments, any worry in her voice. Benjamin describes a quiet call about a leaky faucet, nothing urgent, just the kind of problem Elaine would have fixed herself if she had the right wrench. He mentions the dog again. Pepper is always near. Pepper is not barking now. Callen writes. Dispatch pings his shoulder mic, no activity on Elaine's bank cards, no calls from her phone since yesterday morning. A neighbor's door camera shows no door-to-door solicitors, no ride shares, no package deliveries. The mail still sits in the black metal box out by the curb, a modest stack for a woman who reads what she receives rather than letting it pile. The mail carrier, reached on his route, says Elaine waved Tuesday and asked about the library book drive this weekend. Exactly the kind of small-town exchange that means everything later when you try to piece a life back from splinters. Mid-morning brings a sun that burns off the chill but not the feeling. The house is resecured. A bolo goes out, elderly female, 5'5", gray hair, last seen in the neighborhood, vehicle still at home. If anyone has seen her, call. If anyone has heard Pepper, call about that too. Benjamin doesn't want to leave. He stands by the edge of the driveway, hands in his jacket pockets, and looks at the single tire track in the dust that could mean nothing or could mean something if you're the kind of person who turns the world into ledger lines. Detective Callen tells him gently they'll do another pass later, and that sometimes people you love surprise you in good ways. Benjamin nods because the alternative is harder. Across town, as the day lengthens, the wind picks up. The desert always breathes in the afternoons. A mile or so beyond the last subdivision, the dirt veins that people call roads cut toward Falcon Ridge Trail, a place where teenagers go to talk louder than they should and older men go to think quieter than they can. A pair of commuters, driving home late down a side road the night before, thought they saw a small fire out that way. They didn't think to call it in then, a burned barrel, maybe, or the dull glow of someone's camp stove, but they will remember it in a few hours when the memory returns with the smell. Back on Juniper Court, the wind tries to lift the corner of Benjamin's old note where it's been replaced on the door as a marker of time, not a message. The camera on the porch catches the ribbon of it fluttering once and then settling again. And in the middle of all that ordinariness, the neighbor's leaf blower, the baby 2 doors down, the delivery van idling briefly like a sigh, the story of Elaine Rowen slips from absence to active search without fanfare. The difference between the two is measured in the space between a doormat and a threshold, and a dog that doesn't bark, and a brother who won't leave. In the next chapter, we'll follow the wind out past the city limits, where a thin plume at Falcon Ridge Trail begins to answer questions nobody wants to ask. The desert doesn't shout when it keeps secrets, it just hums quietly under the sun, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. By the time Detective Mark Callen drove west out of Sierra Valle, the morning had already turned sharp. The sky was the pale blue of winter glass, the kind that makes you squint and rethink what warmth actually means. The dispatch note on his dash read simply, "Possible burned debris, Falcon Ridge Trail." Falcon Ridge wasn't a real ridge, not anymore, just a stretch of half-paved road that ran toward the foothills before dissolving into dust and mesquite. Teenagers came here at night to drink. Hunters used it to sight coyotes at dawn. Truckers cut through when the interstate jammed. It was a place that belonged to no one, and for that reason, it kept too many stories. The first call had come in from a couple, early 40s, who commuted every night from a warehouse job in Clearview City. They'd seen a faint glow near the roadside the night before, nothing dramatic, just a flicker behind the scrub brush, a column of smoke that vanished as soon as they turned their headlights. They shrugged it off. This morning, they couldn't. What they found when they came back stopped them cold. Callen arrived to find Deputy Ruiz already stringing yellow tape between 2 creosote bushes. The desert wind tugged at it gently, like it was breathing. A county fire truck idled 50 yards off, crew standing by in silence. The smell hit first, not fire anymore, but the after of it, the way metal smells after lightning. Ruiz lifted his chin. Found it about 10 feet off the trailhead. Somebody burned a mattress. Callen stepped closer, boots sinking half an inch into the soft dirt. The mattress was exactly that, or what had been one. The springs were exposed, twisted like veins under skin, blackened fabric curled into itself. Scattered near the frame were the remains of nylon straps, melted plastic, something that might have been a zipper once. It could have been nothing. It could have been everything. The detective crouched. The heat was gone, but the ash still held shape, a ghost of weight. He didn't need to touch it to know. His gut whispered what his mind hadn't said yet. "Get CSU out here," he said quietly. "Mark a perimeter 20 yards. No tire tracks smudged yet?" "Couple. We flagged them," Ruiz answered. "Looks like one truck, one sedan. We'll plaster cast both." "Good," Callen thought. "The desert always keeps at least one footprint if you're gentle enough." He straightened, looking around. The land spread wide and clean in every direction, scrub, dry grass, old fence lines leading nowhere. It was beautiful in a way that makes you lonely. Somewhere far off, a hawk circled, the only movement under that endless sky. The medical investigator arrived within the hour, a woman named Dr. June Elias. She carried herself like someone who'd been called to worse places but still wished the list wasn't getting longer. Her team unpacked quietly, gloves, swabs, sample bags, camera clicks that sounded too loud in the open air. "Mattress fire?" she asked without looking up. "Maybe not just that," Callen said. "Neighbors in town say a woman's missing. Name's Elaine Rowen. 66. Her car's at home, keys on the door." Dr. Elias's eyes flicked toward the burnt frame. "We'll see what's left to see." There wasn't much. Ash never gives away easily. But beneath the collapsed coils, one of the techs found something curved, bone pale against the soot. Everyone went quiet for a breath. No one needed to confirm it out loud. Back in Sierra Valle, the news traveled faster than official statements ever could. A town this small doesn't need a broadcast, it just passes concern like currency. At the diner off Main Street, Sandra Cole heard it from a patrolman ordering coffee, something found by the ridge. She put down the pot mid-pour and whispered Elaine's name like it was a question to the ceiling. Benjamin Rowen was already at the precinct when Callen called him in. The detective chose his words carefully. Decades of experience had taught him that how you say something sometimes hurts less than what you say. "We found remains out by Falcon Ridge," he said. "We can't confirm anything yet. But we're treating it seriously." Benjamin's face didn't move at first. Then it did, all at once, not the collapse of drama, but the slow bending of a man whose center of gravity has changed forever. He nodded, the motion tiny, then asked the only question that made sense. "You think it's her?" Callen hesitated just long enough for truth to be understood. "We're checking dental records now." Outside, the wind rattled the blinds. Somewhere a phone rang twice before stopping. By afternoon, Falcon Ridge was a crime scene under a brutal sun. Evidence markers dotted the ground like yellow petals in a field gone gray. The forensics unit moved carefully, documenting tire impressions, collecting soil. One of them found a small length of cord half melted into the dirt. Another photographed the shadow of the mattress springs, the shape they cast like a skeleton drawn by light. Dr. Elias approached Callen with her gloves removed, holding a clipboard. "I can't give you everything yet," she said, "but female, adult, roughly 60s. Partial dental confirms with your missing persons file." That was confirmation without ceremony, the kind detectives hate most. There was no room left for hope. Callen walked back to his car, notebook open, the weight of new responsibility settling over his shoulders like desert dust. The line between missing person and homicide is thin, a signature on a form, a breath you stop holding. Now, everything changed. The first night after the discovery, Callen didn't go home. He sat in his office with the blinds half closed, crime scene photos spread across the desk. He studied the edges, the mattress coil, the burned frame, the faint drag mark leading from the dirt road. He drew 3 names in his notebook. 1. Caroline Dane, daughter-in-law, had access to rental key. 2. Evan Dane, grandson, lives with Caroline. 3. Megan Cross, roommate, no direct connection to Elaine except through Caroline. Next to each name he added short notes in neat handwriting. Motive? Opportunity? Timeline. Caroline had been evicted recently. Benjamin mentioned tension. Evan had a juvenile record. The pattern wasn't proof, but it hummed like one waiting to be tuned. Callen closed his eyes for a second. In cases like this, the first circle is always family. You start closest to the heart and work outward. The following morning, he met Deputy Ruiz again at the Rowen property. The yellow tape was gone now, replaced by quiet. Inside, everything remained exactly as before, lists on the counter, coffee mug untouched. But once you know what you're looking at, you never see ordinary again. Ruiz crouched near the entryway. "Found something we missed yesterday," he said, pointing to a faint smear on the tile just inside the door, not enough to notice before, just a half-inch streak beside the baseboard. A cleaning machine sat nearby, cord coiled neatly. Callen photographed it. He didn't need lab results to guess. Get it to the lab. And bag that carpet cleaner, too. He stood up, scanning the room, the way sunlight hit the curtains, the exact angle of the chair. He imagined Elaine standing here 2 mornings ago, phone in hand, perhaps looking at the list on the fridge. Then the image broke apart. The line between memory and evidence is another thin one. Later that day, Benjamin returned to the house accompanied by Sandra. He wanted to gather a few of Elaine's things for the memorial he was already preparing in his mind, though the word hadn't yet been said. He paused near the fridge, touching the sticky note about the library book drive. His thumb brushed the ink lightly, like he could still feel her planning it. Sandra stood beside him, voice soft. She was proud of that, you know. Always said small things mattered most. Benjamin smiled without joy. She was right. And now it's all small things. At sunset, Callen drove back toward Falcon Ridge. The tape was gone, the land open again, the wind doing what it always does, erasing and remembering at the same time. He parked on the shoulder, engine off. The desert stretched endless before him. In the distance, he could still make out the square of blackened earth where the mattress had burned. Nothing around it stirred. Yet, the air felt full of presence, as if the ground itself wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. He took a slow breath. The hardest part of this job isn't what you see. It's what you have to imagine to understand it. He pulled his notebook from the seat beside him and wrote one line under the suspects list. Find out who wanted Elaine silent. Night fell over Sierra Valle. Porch lights flickered on, one by one, small constellations built by human worry. Inside the station, the evidence board grew, photographs of the property, of Falcon Ridge, of Caroline Dane's rental house now tagged as Scene 2. Detective Callen pinned a map between them, one red line from Elaine's home to Falcon Ridge Trail, 10 miles apart but connected by something more invisible, intent. In the next part of this story, we'll step into that second house, the one Elaine once rented out, where family ties turned into fault lines, and watch as those invisible connections start to tighten into a noose of truth. You learn who a person was in 2 ways, by what they left behind, and by how people talk when they say her name. The morning after Falcon Ridge Trail turned from rumor to confirmation, Detective Mark Callen didn't start at the scene. He came back to the house on Juniper Court, unlocked the door with the same careful turn he'd used the first day, and stepped into the quiet life of Elaine Rowen the way you step into a chapel. No sirens, no voices. Just the sound of a home remembering its owner. He stood in the entry and took the place in like a ledger. Sunlight pooled across the living room rug in a perfect rectangle. The air still had that faint citrus note, not fresh anymore, just the echo of clean. On the kitchen counter, the lists were where he'd seen them yesterday, clipped, dated, neat handwriting that never gave up on a straight line. He read each heading as if they were chapters: hardware store, library drive, call Ben. People think detectives hunt for drama. Most of the time, they catalog ordinary. He photographed the fridge front. A holiday card from a neighbor glued under a magnet shaped like a saguaro. A grocery receipt with items circled: oat milk, dog treats, rubber gloves. A yellow sticky with the librarian's first name and a Saturday time. And tucked beneath the cactus magnet, a faded photo: Elaine on a porch in Clearview County, younger, hair darker, her arm around a boy with a crooked grin. The back of the photo bore a year and a single word in blue ink: Ryan. Callen didn't need the rest of the family story to read the edges. Love leaves a watermark even when the paper is worn. He checked Pepper's corner, the dog blanket folded in half, the empty water bowl aligned to the tile grout. He noted again the carpet cleaner by the hall, the tidy coil of its cord, the way its plastic wheels made small semicircles in the pile. The lab would do what the lab does. His job was to hold the picture steady long enough for truth to come into focus. At 9, he met Sandra Cole at the Sierra Valle Public Library. She'd asked to talk there, she said, because Elaine loved that building almost as much as she loved her porch. The library sat low and square, stucco the color of toast, with a mural of desert wildflowers along one wall and a book drop that clanked like a lunch bell. Inside, a volunteer cart squeaked slowly along a carpet that had witnessed 1,000 quiet afternoons. Sandra arrived with a canvas tote and the same cardigan she'd been wearing on the morning of the welfare check. She looked both relieved to speak and careful about how to do it. "Tell me about Elaine," Callen said, voice soft enough to match the stacks. "She was the sort who made you feel safe if she said, 'I'll handle it,'" Sandra began. "Prim. Not fussy. Up early. Always had stamps in her wallet even after she retired because, she'd say, 'You never know when you'll need to send something that matters.'" Sandra's smile reached exactly halfway to her eyes. She'd bring muffins to the book drive and then apologize that they were store-bought. We all told her no one cared. She cared. What did her days look like? "The same," Sandra said, and it wasn't dismissive. That was her grace. Monday, errands. Tuesday, coffee and crosswords. Wednesday, check the rental next door and remind Caroline about the rent again. She hesitated on the last sentence. "You know about the rental. I suppose you know about the rest." "We're building a timeline," Callen said. "How long was the tension with Caroline Dane?" "A while. 2 years? Maybe more." After Sandra's fingers pressed the tote strap, after Ryan, Elaine's son, died, things got complicated. Caroline struggled. The boy, Evan, too. Elaine tried to be generous. She said it was the only way she knew to still be a mother. Sandra met his eyes squarely. "But generosity goes thin if you keep stepping in the same puddle." Callen wrote the line verbatim. "Did Elaine talk about selling the rental?" "She did. Quietly. She circled listings in the paper, just to see. She worried it would make her the villain. She didn't have that in her. But she also didn't have endless money. She told me she'd changed the locks and set a date for keys to be returned. She was nervous about that part, not for herself, but because she hated conflict." Who else did Elaine keep close? Benjamin, her brother. Couple of old friends from the post office. The librarian, Marta, would set aside fiction she thought Elaine would like. And me, I suppose. I'm not special. I was just next door enough. Callen thanked her and asked if he could look at the community room. He wanted to see what Elaine had planned to see Saturday, the tables with paper signs, book drive Saturday 10 to 1, the box of paperbacks labeled mystery in a hand almost as tidy as Elaine's. On a bulletin board near the door, a flyer had slipped its pushpin and drooped like a tired leaf. He straightened it and took a photo. Small things mattered. Sandra had been right. From the library, Callen drove to the Sierra Valle post office. The supervisor there, a man named Hector Diaz, remembered Elaine's years in sorting and the way she kept a calendar without missing a beat. She used to joke that the mail trained her to live at the speed of ordinary, Diaz said, leaning on a counter polished by 1,000 elbows. No fuss. But when something wasn't right, you could tell by her eyes. She'd go quiet. That was her siren. "Did you see her this week?" Callen asked. 2 days before she. 2 days before, he corrected himself. She waved through the glass. Asked about our drive for coats. Told me she'd bring one. She always followed through. His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry. I don't have anything useful." "You have more than you think," Callen said. People often did. Back at the Rowen house just after noon, Benjamin waited on the porch steps, a folder across his knees. He'd written down names, dates, and his own recollections with the same deliberate script his sister used. When you lose someone organized, you inherit their discipline whether you wanted it or not. "I'm not here to tell you my grief," he said before Callen could speak. "I know you're not a chaplain. But I can tell you how she measured her days." He walked the detective through the rooms as if giving a tour of a museum where nothing could be moved. She read the paper, circled sales for neighbors who needed them. She checked the weather for the dog, the trash for raccoons, the porch for packages, even if they were for the lady 3 doors down. She set Pepper's bowl on the same square of tile, like it mattered. People laugh at that kind of thing until they need to find courage. Routine is where you store it. They paused at the desk in the spare room. The yellow pad with key tags still lay under that envelope labeled locksmith, rental. One plastic tag was indeed missing, the one embossed rental. Benjamin swallowed. She called me on Tuesday. Said she'd gotten the new locks and wanted me to swing by this weekend when Caroline returned the keys. He glanced toward the adjoining wall, the one that separated Elaine's home from the rental's garage. She said it would be fine. She always said that. Even when it wasn't. Did she ever say she was afraid of Caroline? Afraid? No. Elaine reserved that word for lightning and fast drivers, Benjamin said. But she had a way of softening trouble by calling it something else. They're having a hard time, she'd say. Let's be kind and firm. She thought those could live in the same sentence. Callen noted the phrasing. Kind and firm. It sounded like a motto or a prayer. He asked about Evan. Benjamin's face shifted in that complicated way uncles' faces do when they talk about nephews who lost too much too young. He was a sweet kid once. Then he was a quiet kid. Then he was a kid I didn't recognize. Elaine never stopped saying his name softly, even when she said it hard. Callen collected Elaine's recent mail with Benjamin's permission and flagged the envelopes for the lab to check for prints, utility company, pharmacy, 2 charity appeals, 1 notice about property taxes that looked like a warning even if the font tried to be friendly. He asked if he could take Elaine's lists. Benjamin nodded and then, impulsively, tore a clean sheet from the pad and rewrote the heading of the top one, Library Drive, like an act of preservation. In the late afternoon, Marta from the library stopped by, hat still on, a sealed manila envelope in her hands. Books Elaine put on hold, she said, voice passing between hope and apology. I didn't know where else to bring them. Thank you, Benjamin said, and he meant for more than books. Callen thanked her too and asked for a few minutes on the porch. He wanted to keep the house itself from filling with the procedural. They sat beneath the porch light that had burned through 2 mornings now, and Marta described the way Elaine read, slowly, with a pen, underlining not sentences but single words she liked. She brought back a novel once with 1 word underlined 5 times, steadfast. She told me she wanted to remember how it sounded. When dusk came, the desert turned copper and then gray. Porch lights clicked to life like small promises you make a neighborhood when the world feels unsteady. Pepper's leash still hung on a hook by the door. Callen wrote down the brand on its metal clip because even that could matter later. Here's what the portrait looked like when he pinned it on the board that night. Elaine Rowen, 66. Widow. Retired postal worker. Devoted to small routines, community drives, a rescue dog, and a rental house that had become a problem she hoped to solve with grace. Loved by neighbors. Close to her brother. Car at home. Keys posted on the door. Last week, changed locks on the rental and set a plan to collect keys. Final days included library plans and a call about a faucet. Disappeared somewhere between ordinary and unanswered. You build a victimology not to glorify the end, but to honor the middle, to remember that the person at the heart of a case wasn't a headline but a life. From this portrait, threads reach outward. 1 thread ties to the rental and to Caroline Dane, whose stability had slipped past sympathy into cost. Another thread winds through Evan, the grandson who once laughed at backyard jokes and now kept his hood up in doorways. A third crosses Megan Cross, the roommate whose name sat at the edge of every account like a footnote that might become a chapter. And floating near all of it is Olivia Hart, the girlfriend people mentioned with a softness that suggested she wasn't built for this kind of storm. Part 3 ends the way Elaine would have liked, not with a rush, but with a list: who she was, what she did, where she went, whom she loved, what she planned next. In that order. The next part has to flip the lens. We've met the person who deserves the truth, now we meet the people who can't keep theirs straight. In Part 4, we step into the circle that tightens: Caroline, Evan, Megan, and Olivia, and the fault lines that turned family into suspects. In every small town, suspicion doesn't start with strangers. It starts with the people close enough to borrow your ladder and remember where you keep the spare key. By the time the sun cleared the red line of the Sierra Valle hills, Detective Mark Callen had 3 names circled on the board: Caroline Dane, Evan Dane, and Megan Cross. A fourth name, Olivia Hart, hovered off to the side with a note, possible witness, not a driver of events. The plan for the day was simple on paper: reconstruct a timeline, test alibis, and watch for the tiny hesitations that truth never needs. He started next door, at the rental house Elaine Rowen had been trying to reclaim. The garage door was up again. Inside, the same cardboard landscape waited, a mattress leaning on a wall, totes labeled winter, kitchen, miscellaneous, and a bucket with rags that had been washed too many times to remember their first job. A carpet cleaner sat in the corner, its tank rinsed and upside down to dry. Caroline met him at the threshold. She had that rigid poise of someone who has rehearsed being reasonable. Late 30s by look, early 40s by paperwork, hair tied back, jacket zipped to the collar. She led with assent. "Detective, we'll cooperate. I don't know what happened to Elaine. I'm scared, too." Callen nodded like he'd heard both halves of that sentence before. "Let's talk about Friday and Saturday. Start early, walk me through." She opened her phone and scrolled as if time lived inside it. "Friday morning, I texted Elaine at 10:30-ish about the keys. We'd agreed I'd finish the move and meet her this weekend. I was here most of the day, then took Evan to the motel because our lease ended." She paused just long enough for the word evicted to hover in the space she left. "I came back Saturday at 10 a.m. to collect a few more boxes. I knocked on Elaine's door to drop the keys, no answer. I figured we'd try Sunday." Callen let the silence stretch. People clarify in silence. "I should have called," she added. But she sometimes didn't pick up when she was tired. He noted the phrasing. Tired is a word people use when they want to make weather out of conflict. "Who was with you Friday?" "Megan mostly. Evan came by with a friend for an hour." "Name?" "Olivia. She and Evan are together." Callen gestured toward the carpet cleaner. "Yours?" Caroline's eyes flicked and returned. "Yes. We shampooed the living room last week so we could get the security." She caught the misstep and pared it back. "So the place would be decent when we left." He walked the rooms with her, kitchen cleared, bedrooms in stages of goodbye, blinds closed the way people close lids when they don't want to look anymore. He asked to see the text thread. She showed him a string of messages that did what texts do, hint at logistics without holding the whole conversation. He photographed the screen with her permission, thanked her, and said they might need to come back with a warrant to collect the cleaner and a few other items. Caroline's nod was the practiced kind. "Of course," she said. She'd said of course 3 times in 15 minutes. Outside, Megan cross-leaned against a dented pickup, arms folded, gaze quick. 30s, restless energy, denim vest despite the winter air. She volunteered before being asked, the way some people try to outrun the first question. "I helped him move," she said. "That's it. I never had a problem with Ms. Rowen. She was fine. The ellipses did too much work." "Where were you Friday night?" Callen asked. "Here until late. We got tacos. I went home." Her mouth tugged to the side. "You want the receipt?" She dug into the console and produced a crumpled paper that did, in fact, say La Palma, 8:42 p.m. He took a photo. Alibis, in the wild, are often tacos and timestamps. "Did you see Elaine Friday?" "Once," Megan said. She sat in her car. "Watched us move." I waved. She didn't wave back. The defensive shrug followed. She had reasons. "Which were?" "I don't know all of them. I wasn't in the family." That line mattered. People outside the center often see the shape of a storm before the people standing in it feel the rain. By late morning, Callen and Deputy Ruiz headed across town to a low-roof motel with a neon vacancy sign that buzzed like an old bee. Evan Dane answered the door to a room that smelled of pizza and laundry detergent. 19 going on something unstated, hoodie up, eyes red not from tears but from the kind of nights that don't turn into sleep. Olivia Hart sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded tight around a phone like it could remember for her. "Evan, we need your help with the timeline," Callen said. He kept his voice level, not parental, not prosecutorial. When did you last see your grandmother? Tuesday, Evan said after a beat. At her place. She asked about the keys again. I told her mom had it handled. His stare slid toward the TV and back. I went to the rental Friday to grab a box of shoes. That's it. See Elaine then? No, he scratched at his sleeve cuff. She wasn't outside. I didn't knock. Where were you Friday night? With Olivia, he said quickly. We got lake fries at the gas station and watched a movie. You can check the cameras. He was sharper than his posture suggested. Olivia exhaled, a small surrender. We were at Vista Fuel around 9. He bought a soda. I got gum. She seemed relieved to offer detail that didn't require choosing sides. Either of you go west of town? Falcon Ridge? Ruiz asked. Evan shook his head too fast. Olivia's eyes flicked to him and then down. Callen logged the glance. Not a confession, not even a contradiction, just the natural geometry of two stories finding their edges. He turned to Olivia. If you remember anything later, even if you think it's small, call me. Small is where cases live. They left a card. The door closed. The neon buzzed again. Back at the station, Callen pinned 4 index cards under the map and ran red thread: Elaine's house, the rental, the motel, Falcon Ridge Trail. He wrote times on the threads the way a surveyor marks distance: Friday 10:35 a.m. text, Friday evening packing, Saturday 10 a.m. attempted key drop, Saturday late morning. Discovery site revisited by the couple, Sunday morning, Benjamin's 911 call. The picture wasn't complete, but pictures rarely start that way. CSU dropped new data on his desk before lunch, a partial shoe print in the rental's entry consistent with a men's skate-style sneaker, size in the neighborhood of Evans. Faint trace on the tile at Elaine's threshold reacted as blood under presumptive testing, and a vacuumed sample from the carpet cleaner's tank showed diluted biological material, too washed to read yet, but promising as a path. Evidence is slow, on purpose, and the job of a detective is to keep momentum without outrunning the facts. He sent Ruiz to pull convenience store footage from Vista Fuel and the taco shop near the rental. He called the gas station near the western cut-through as well, not because he knew something, but because you learn to ask in wider circles than you need. A clerk remembered a blue pickup buying ice Saturday, not gas. Megan's truck was blue. He wrote ice, 11:12 a.m., checked transaction log and kept moving. In the afternoon, he brought Caroline to the precinct for a formal interview. Rooms like this have a particular temperature, cool enough to wake you up, warm enough not to feel like punishment. He started with courtesy. Water? No, she folded her hands on the table. No jewelry. Nails plain. A tiny band of lighter skin where a ring had been once. Grief and practicality sometimes look identical. He laid out a paper timeline and invited her to add or correct. She did both, carefully. Yes, she texted Elaine Friday morning about keys. Yes, she was at the rental for most of the day. Yes, Megan helped. Yes, Evan came by with Olivia. No, she had not seen Elaine since earlier in the week. No, she did not know why Elaine's phone didn't ring. Yes, she was aware Elaine had changed the locks. No, she did not keep a spare. Callen asked about money the way a carpenter checks a level, without ceremony. Were you current on rent? Caroline's jaw tightened. We were behind. Elaine knew we'd catch up when the tax refund came. She knew. Did she tell you she planned to sell? She looked at listings, Caroline said, choosing each word like a fragile dish. She said she didn't want to be the bad guy. I told her she wasn't. A beat. But you felt like she was? Caroline's eyes flashed once, quick, then cooled. I felt like life kept shrinking us, and she was part of the math. Is that what you want to hear? I want to hear what's true, Callen said, steady. Truth has edges. It helps us draw a line around what didn't happen so we can see what did. He slid a photo across the table, the carpet cleaner, the coil of its cord, the faint stripe on Elaine's entry tile. We'll process these. If they mean nothing, they'll mean nothing. If they mean something, we'll talk again. Caroline steadied the photo. For the first time, the mask slipped just a fraction. Not panic. Not guilt. The expression you see when a person realizes the world has started measuring in units beyond her control. When she left, Megan was in the lobby, jittery, energy coiled tight. "Do I need a lawyer?" she blurted. "You need to tell the truth," Callen said. "Truth saves time." Megan laughed once, without humor. "Time's the only thing I don't have." He didn't press. "You don't harvest what isn't ripe." He asked her to sit for a formal statement the next morning. She said yes in a tone that meant she wanted to, and maybe couldn't. As dusk pulled across Sierra Valle, the map on the board began to look less like a picture and more like a machine, a set of moving parts that would either mesh or strip. Falcon Ridge sat 10 miles west, mute but not silent. The rental was 30 steps from Elaine's living room, a distance short enough to measure in heartbeats. The motel was a mile and a half south, where neon kept people honest about loneliness. In that triangle, the case would either break or hold. Callen locked the evidence room and stood for a long moment in the bullpen, listening to the building's night sounds, the hum of the soda machine, the squeak of a chair, Ruiz coughing twice down the hall. He wrote one more line at the bottom of the day's notes: "When stories disagree, listen to the parts they agree to avoid." In Part 5, the case tightens on something small, a single trace no one planned for, proof that travels on saws and settles and seams, leading from a clean house to a dirty truth. You don't always catch a case by what's there. Sometimes you catch it by what shouldn't be. By sunrise, Detective Mark Callen had 3 items on his desk that didn't look like much: a half-inch smear beside Elaine Rowen's entryway baseboard, a carpet cleaner with its tank rinsed a little too clean, and a partial shoe impression lifted from the rental's threshold. None of it told a story alone. Together, they hummed like a song you've heard before but can't place yet. He started with the floor. CSU had swabbed the faint streak on Elaine's tile and run a presumptive test. Positive. Not enough for certainty, but enough to move. The text note said the smear ran horizontal, low to the ground, as if a sleeve or a cuff had brushed against it. A second note, the kind you only write when you've learned to notice small things, said the cleaner's wheels made paired crescent ridges in the living room carpet that led to the hall and back. If you pushed the machine straight, the tracks would be straight. These were not. Someone changed direction when they remembered the hallway, Callen murmured, circling the sentence with his pen. He signed the search warrant packet that had lived on his keyboard since yesterday and called Judge Fielding. By 8:30, a deputy was jogging back in with a stamped order. Callen and Deputy Ruiz headed for the rental. The house next door wore its move-out face again, garage up, boxes paused, the air smelling like lemon solvent and dust. Caroline Dane met them at the door, jaw tight but composed. Megan cross-paced near the pickup, a coffee she wasn't drinking going cold in her hand. Callen read the warrant calmly, as if reciting a recipe. "We'll be collecting the carpet cleaner, vacuum contents, several shoe pairs, and we'll be doing latent testing in the entry," he said. "You're free to stay or step outside. Your choice." Caroline swallowed and chose outside. Megan hovered between the two like a needle trying to pick a direction. Inside, CSU went to work. They bagged the cleaner and snapped shots of the tank's inner film, just a shadow of cloudiness if you didn't want to see it, evidence if you did. A tech knelt at the threshold with a small blue flashlight and a spritz bottle. No drama, no swirl of luminescent TV magic, just a patient cataloging of microstreaks along the baseboard that caught light when the angle was right. Transfer, not volume. Motion, not struggle. Callen photographed the pattern. You build a case with verbs. In the back bedroom, Ruiz lined up 4 pairs of shoes against a wall and photographed the soles, Caroline's running shoes, Megan's work boots, none of interest. Then a pair of black skate-style sneakers, size that matched the partial from yesterday, scuffed at the toe the way a nervous kid taps while thinking. He bagged them, labeled Evan Dane, Pass. Match, and moved on. Out on the drive, Callen asked Megan how long the cleaner had been in the house. "Couple weeks," she said, eyes on the cup. "Place needed it." "Who pushed it last?" "Me. And sometimes Evan." She hesitated. "He kept saying the carpet smelled like dog." "Whose dog?" She blinked, realizing the misstep. "I don't know," she said, too fast. "It's a rental. Lots of dogs." Callen didn't correct her. He wrote the sentence and underlined Evan. Then he bagged a flimsy gas station ice receipt that had blown under a shelving unit in the garage, Saturday, 11:12 a.m., Vista Fuel West, and added it to the growing constellation of small things. Back at the station by late morning, forensics started coming back in fragments, the way truth often does. The tank wrench from the carpet cleaner? Diluted biological consistent with Elaine's blood type, pending DNA. The shoe impression from the threshold? Class consistent with the skate sneaker Ruiz had collected, the outsole pattern matched in 3 were features: a chipped corner on the heel, a flattened circle mid-foot, a split line near the toe. Not a unique fingerprint, but a handshake. Callen sent Vista Fuel a preservation request and drove over. The clerk, a teenager with a name tag that read Bryce, pulled the Saturday camera without fuss. In the corner of the screen at 11:10 a.m., a blue pickup eased past the pump to the side door, not stopping for gas, just idling. 2 figures went in. 3 minutes later, one came out with 2 bags of ice balanced on a forearm, cash exchange visible. No plate on the feed angle, but the truck had a sun-faded tailgate and a sticker near the bumper that looked like a band logo flaking off. Megan's truck wore the same kind of sun and the same tired sticker. "Print that still," Callen said. "Timestamp, camera number." He didn't leap. Ice can cool soda. It can also slow a smell. The desert teaches bad lessons to people who want shortcuts. He wrote innocent use/non-innocent use on a page and left the line between them open. At 1:05 p.m., Olivia Hart called. Her voice was the sound of someone trying to be brave in a room with thin walls. "Detective? You said small things matter." "They do," Callen said. "I remembered something about Friday night," she whispered. "Evan changed his shoes when we got to the motel. He said the old ones were trashed. He put them in a black trash bag and tied it tight. He threw it in the dumpster out back." "Time?" "Around 10:30. The movie we watched started at 11. I only remember because the neon kept flickering numbers." "What color were the old shoes?" "Black. The kind skaters wear." Callen thanked her and hung up. He didn't run, he walked. It was faster. The motel dumpster was half emptied by mid-afternoon, but luck still favored the persistent. Ruiz climbed in with a grin that said he'd done worse. He came up holding a black bag tied in a knot. Inside, black skate shoes, laces grimy, tread worn exactly where the lift had shown. The smell was ordinary, trash, and the contents were worse only in what they implied, not in what they showed. Safe to the eye. Heavy to the case. "Bag M," Callen said. "Full chain." He didn't call Evan. "Not yet. You don't tip a scale while you're still adding weights." The phone records came next. Tower pings put Caroline's phone at the rental most of Friday and Saturday morning. Megan's phone bounced between the rental and a west side corridor near the Falcon Ridge cut-through around 11:25 a.m., 10 minutes after the ice. Evan's phone went dark twice, briefly, Friday late and Saturday late morning, the way phones do when they're powered down or in airplane mode long enough to think, not long enough to disappear. Callen drew dashed lines on the map where the signals paused. Dashed lines carry a different kind of weight. He stepped back from the board and let the picture talk. Elaine's house, small horizontal smear near the floor, cleaner tracks changing direction, pepper quiet, keys on door. Rental, partial shoe impression at threshold, carpet cleaner rinsed, entry baseboard microstreaks, ice receipt Saturday. Motel, black skate shoes and dumpster. Falcon Ridge, mattress frame, cord remnant, Dr. Elias's dental confirm. Stories disagree. Objects don't. Late afternoon, he brought Caroline back, not to trap her, but to measure her against things that didn't care how anyone felt. He laid photos on the table with the distance a surgeon sets between instruments. "This is a shoe print from your entry," he said. "This is a shoe recovered at your motel. This is a still from a camera near Falcon Ridge showing a blue pickup like the one in your driveway buying ice. Here is a receipt. And this," he tapped the photo of Elaine's baseboard, "is your neighbor's hallway. I'm going to say this slowly because I know you're tired. The smallest traces are pointing in one direction." Caroline stared. The mask shifted, broke, reformed, a strobe of calculation, pride, fear, and something that might have been relief and might have been resentment. She pressed her palms flat. "You think I hurt Elaine?" "I think Elaine is gone," Callen said evenly, "and the path between her last normal morning and Falcon Ridge runs through this house." Her eyes watered without tears. "I asked for help," she said, voice dropping. "Not with this. With life." It kept saying no. "Life is not the one asking questions," Callen said, softer. "I am." He didn't push for a confession. Pressure without place makes noise, not truth. He ended the interview when her answers started to loop, then walked her to the door. In the lobby, Megan looked up, tiny hope in the look a person gives a coin toss. He told her they'd talk in the morning like they'd planned. She nodded, shaky, and left with Caroline, the two of them moving in parallel lines that wanted to intersect but couldn't yet. Back in the bullpen, Dr. June Elias phoned in with a quiet update. Preliminary DNA from the cleaner tank matched Elaine. The sample was thin, the way water makes everything thinner, but the numbers were enough. It wasn't drama, it was arithmetic. Callen wrote one sentence on the bottom of the day's page: "The house cleaned itself only where it mattered." He pinned a photo of the black shoes beside the lifted print and drew a short red line between them. It was only an inch on the corkboard, the kind of distance you could close with a finger. But in a courtroom one day, that inch might span an entire life. On his way out, he stopped by the row of vending machines. The soda one word, hesitated, and then released a can with a thud. Machines tell the truth by doing what they're built to do. People tell the truth when they remember how. The smallest trace had done its job. It had turned a triangle of places into a corridor of movement. In Part 6, that corridor narrows to 3 stories told from 3 chairs, stories that start apart and end at the same door. Truth never arrives as a confession. It arrives as friction, 3 stories rubbing against each other until the false parts burn away. Detective Mark Callen began the morning with a board full of dots and a room that smelled faintly of dry erase ink and stale coffee. Elaine Rowen was no longer a mystery. What remained was who turned her quiet life into silence and why. The smallest traces had spoken, but now the people had to. He called them in one by one. Caroline Dane came first. Always early, always rehearsed. She sat across from him in the same interview room as before, hands clasped, eyes steady. "Caroline," Callen began, "this isn't an accusation. It's a map. You tell me where you were, I'll tell you where the evidence says you were. Let's see if they meet." She exhaled through her nose, nodded. "Friday morning I texted Elaine. Friday afternoon I packed. Saturday I came back for the keys. That's it." He slid 2 photos across the table, a carpet cleaner and a black shoe. "You recognize either?" She looked down. "That's my cleaner. We borrowed it from the neighbor before. The shoes, Evans. He said they were falling apart. And you cleaned Saturday morning?" "Yes. We wanted the deposit," she stopped herself. "We wanted it decent." Callen watched her hands tighten around each other. "What happened after you finished?" "I left. Megan was still here. Evan went to the motel. He let the quiet hang. The clock ticked loud enough to make its own testimony. Finally she asked, "Do you really think I could hurt her?" Callen didn't answer the question. "I think every person in this room had a reason to make something stop." She blinked hard. "Elaine treated me like a tenant. I was family once. Do you understand what that feels like?" He wrote down resentment disguised as grief and closed the folder. "We'll talk again," he said softly. "Maybe when the hurt is smaller." Megan Cross entered 5 minutes later, denim vest, jaw tight. She carried the same energy as a fuse that hasn't decided if it's lit. "I told you everything," she said before the door shut. "I think you told me what you practiced," Callen replied. "Now I need what you remember." She looked at the ceiling like it might help. Caroline was falling apart. Elaine wanted them out. I helped because that's what friends do. But it got tense. Elaine came by Friday, sat in her car, watching us. Caroline snapped. Said she was done being treated like trash. "What did you do?" "I kept packing." She rubbed her wrist. Then Evan showed up. Said his grandma was being impossible. Caroline yelled. Elaine left. That's all. Callen leaned back. Saturday morning, who suggested going west of town? What? He turned his laptop so she could see the frozen image, the blue pickup idling beside Vista Fuel, the blurred outline of two figures, the timestamp reading 11:12 a.m. "Maybe that's us," she said. "We bought ice for drinks." He nodded slowly. "You didn't buy gas. You stayed 3 minutes. Then you drove west." Her throat worked once before she found words. "I didn't know where we were going." He didn't push further. She was telling truth, just not the whole width of it. "Megan," he said gently, "people think loyalty is silence. It's not. It's showing up when truth needs a witness." When she left the room, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and didn't look back. Last came Evan Dane. 19, hood up, wrists in the sleeves of a borrowed sweatshirt. He looked smaller without defiance, like the version of himself Elaine probably still pictured. Callen set the scene with care. "You know why you're here." "Because of my shoes," Evan muttered. "And because of what your girlfriend told us," Callen said evenly. "She said you threw those shoes away Friday night. They were ruined." "From what?" Evan stared at the table's metal edge until his reflection blurred. "I helped clean," he said finally. "Clean what?" "The carpet. The hallway." "Why the hallway?" He hesitated. "There was something on it. Mom said spill. I just helped." Callen pushed the photo of the faint streak on the tile toward him. "This spill?" Evan's shoulders caved a little. It was already there. "Already," Callen repeated, not asking, just echoing. "She said Elaine cut herself." "That's what she told me." "And you believed her?" He nodded, eyes glassy. "You want to believe your mom's not lying." "Evan, belief isn't guilt. Action is." "Did you see your grandmother after Friday?" "No," a whisper. "She was supposed to come Saturday morning. We left before that." The detective closed his notebook. "I believe you helped clean something you didn't understand. I believe you ran out of explanations when the cleaner ran out of water. And I believe you're the only one who can tell me how deep this goes." Evan's answer came small, but it came. "Mom said Grandma wanted to stop living like this, alone, angry, broke. She said we were helping her move on. I thought she meant forgiving." "Not," he trailed off. Callen let the silence cover the rest. Some truths finished themselves. By evening, the board in Callen's office had changed shape. The red thread connecting Elaine's home to the rental now crossed a new tag labeled cleaner. Another line ran from rental to Vista Fuel, then west to Falcon Ridge. The geometry of guilt was no longer theoretical, it had angles. Ruiz dropped 2 new lab sheets on the desk. DNA from the cleaner matched Elaine. The residue in the truck bed matched gasoline compounds. And a partial fingerprint on the cleaner's handle belonged to Caroline Dane. Callen didn't smile. He rarely did at moments like this. Closure in detective work never feels like victory, it feels like gravity. He stared at the lines, then at the photo of Elaine pinned above them. Her face, mid-laugh, the kind of kindness that doesn't expect danger. He whispered, "We're almost there, ma'am. Hold on." He brought them all together, Caroline, Megan, Evan, in one room, not for drama but for calibration. People's stories align differently when they have to share air. He started neutral. "We've confirmed the biological trace from Elaine's home, the carpet cleaner, and your shoes. We also know your truck was near Falcon Ridge Saturday morning." Caroline's head turned sharply toward Megan. "You told them that?" "I didn't have to," Callen said. "The desert told us." Evan whispered, "Grandma didn't deserve," and stopped when his mother's look cut sideways. Callen stood, slow. "Here's what I think. Elaine planned to collect the keys Friday. She changed the locks, wanted the rental sold." Tension rose. "You cleaned to erase that moment, not just the carpet. You left Saturday morning, drove west, thought fire could finish what guilt couldn't. But you missed something." He tapped the photo of the tile smear. "One mark. The smallest trace. That's all it takes." Megan broke first, hands trembling. "I didn't mean, it wasn't supposed, she just fell," Caroline shouted. "Stop talking." Ruiz stepped in, calm but ready. Callen raised a hand. "No one's yelling. We're just done pretending." He turned to Evan. "You helped clean. You didn't light anything. You have a chance to separate your story from theirs. Do that now." Evan stared at the table again, then at his mother, then back to Callen. "She said Grandma wanted to go. That she asked us. But she lied." The words cracked mid-sentence. "She always lies when she's scared." The room deflated like air leaving a balloon. Caroline looked older by decades. Megan sobbed quietly, her eyes fixed on the floor. Callen said nothing for a long time. Then, softly, "Detective's advice, tell the truth while it still belongs to you. Once it's in paperwork, it never does again." They each signed statements before sunset. Attorneys would come later, paperwork would multiply like dust. But the structure of the story was now whole. Elaine confronted Caroline about eviction, an argument turned physical, panic filled the space that followed, Megan and Evan were pulled into cleanup. Saturday morning became transport, and Falcon Ridge became the end of a road no one meant to travel. That night, Callen stood in the desert alone, the wind bending the dry grass around the scorched patch where the mattress had been. The stars came out in quiet layers. He spoke to the air more than to anyone. "People think crime is about rage," he said. "Mostly, it's about panic and the way love curdles when it runs out of room." He looked down at the sand. There, faintly pressed, the pattern of his own boot tread joined hundreds of others, a reminder that even investigators leave marks. He exhaled, the way a man does when a story is finished but peace hasn't yet decided to come. The desert doesn't keep secrets. It only buries them until someone learns how to listen. By the time dawn touched Sierra Valle, the investigation had moved from talk to proof. What had begun as whispers and contradictions was now shaping into something colder, heavier, the kind of truth that doesn't leave room for hope. Detective Mark Callen arrived early that morning, coffee in hand, the faint hum of air conditioning echoing through the nearly empty precinct. On his desk sat two folders, one marked forensics, the other witnesses. He opened the first, and the photos inside spoke louder than words. There it was, the carpet cleaner from Elaine Rowen's house, its inner tank swabbed and tested. The report confirmed what instinct had already whispered, traces of Elaine's DNA mixed with detergent residue. Not a spill. A cleanup. And next to that, the fibers found in the bed of the blue pickup matched the same low-pile carpet from the rental. Someone hadn't just moved out, someone had tried to erase a life. Callen turned to the second folder. Inside was a name he didn't expect, Nora Ellison, a cashier at Vista Fuel, the gas station captured in surveillance the morning of Elaine's disappearance. Her statement was brief but telling. They came in around 11. The woman with brown hair looked tired, paid for ice but stared at the pump like she wanted to say something. The boy kept his head down. The friend stayed in the truck. They didn't buy gas. They just drove west. That was enough. enough to fill the space between speculation and certainty. By mid-morning, Deputy Ruiz came in carrying a small, sealed evidence bag. Inside, barely visible, was a gold earring, delicate, old-fashioned, found near Falcon Ridge, about 20 feet from the burn site. "They missed it," Ruiz said quietly. "Half buried under sand." Callen took it in his palm, studying it like a clue from a different century. "Her brother said she wore a pair just like this," he murmured. "One missing the clasp." Ruiz nodded. "We'll get prints, but the heat out there might not give us much." "Doesn't matter," Callen said. "Even the smallest thing that doesn't belong can tell you who was careless." He placed the earring beside the photo of Elaine on his desk. For the first time, the board behind him, the red threads, the names, the arrows, began to look less like a puzzle and more like a confession that had taken shape on its own. Later that afternoon, Evan Dane requested to speak again. His public defender sat beside him, silent but alert. Callen entered the room with a single goal, not to intimidate, but to confirm what the evidence already suggested. Evan's voice trembled at first. "I need to fix something I said yesterday," he began. Callen stayed still. "You're not fixing it. You're clarifying it." Evan nodded. "Right. Clarifying. The night before, Grandma came to the house. She didn't yell. She just wanted to talk to Mom. Said she was selling the place. I was in the kitchen. Megan was packing. Mom got mad, said we had nowhere else to go. I heard glass break, then quiet." He stopped. "When I came in, Grandma was sitting on the floor. She was bleeding, not bad, just from her hand. Mom was shaking. Said it was fine. She told me to clean up before anyone saw. I did what she said." Callen wrote the words carefully. "Did you see your grandmother leave after that?" Evan's eyes dropped. "No. I went to the motel with Megan that night. Mom stayed. Next morning she called and said we had to move everything out. She didn't sound normal." Callen's voice was gentle. "Did she say why?" "She just said, 'It's done.'" The detective closed his notebook. The weight of those two words, "it's done," could have meant anything, but paired with the evidence, they meant only one thing. Before leaving, Callen asked one last question. "Evan, when you helped your mother clean, what were you thinking?" The boy's answer was barely a whisper. "That family doesn't cover for each other because they're guilty. They do it because they're scared." By evening, the forensics lab in Santa Fe delivered its final confirmation. The gasoline traces found in the truck bed matched the same mixture used in Vista Fuel's premium-grade pump, the one closest to the cashier's window. Caroline hadn't just driven west, she'd taken the same route the camera saw, with the same fuel still clinging to her tires. That was enough for the warrant. But before Callen could move forward, something unexpected happened. The witness came to him. Nora Ellison, the gas station clerk, stood at the front desk, twisting her ring nervously. "Detective," she said, "I remembered something else." He invited her to sit. She took a deep breath. "When they left, I stepped outside to throw the trash. Their truck stopped at the road. The woman, the one with the brown hair, got out and opened the tailgate. She said something to the boy. I couldn't hear it, but she looked back at me. Like she wanted me to notice." Callen leaned forward. "What made you think that?" "Because when she looked away, she started crying. Not like someone angry. Like someone saying goodbye." That moment, as simple as it sounded, changed the emotional tone of the case. It wasn't just about cruelty anymore, it was about collapse. Desperation in slow motion. The next day, the warrants were signed. Search teams combed both properties again. In Caroline's rental, they found a torn page from Elaine's notepad, tucked behind a kitchen drawer. It read in shaky cursive, "Caroline, please don't make this harder. I want peace for both of us." No date. No signature. Just the quiet echo of a woman trying to stop something before it began. When Callen read it, he didn't feel triumph, only the dull ache that comes with being right too late. He ordered the press to stay back. There would be no spectacle. Elaine Rowen's story didn't belong to headlines, it belonged to silence, to the kind of justice that doesn't celebrate. That night, Callen sat on the steps outside the station, looking up at the dark Arizona sky. Ruiz joined him with 2 coffees. "You ever wonder why we do this?" Ruiz asked. Callen chuckled softly. "Every day." "And?" He looked at the horizon, where the faint orange glow of the city bled into the desert. "Because someone has to listen after the shouting stops. Someone has to tell the truth when the truth can't speak for itself." Ruiz nodded. "You think they'll ever say why they did it?" Callen shrugged. "People rarely know their own reasons. They act, they panic, and by the time they think, it's too late." He took a sip, then added quietly, "Elaine's story doesn't end with them. It ends when people stop believing silence is safety." A week later, as Caroline, Megan, and Evan were formally charged, the case files closed on Callen's desk. The board in his office, once a maze of unanswered questions, now stood still, every line leading back to one point, Falcon Ridge. He left the board up, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Because every detective knows the pattern, one family's secret always looks like another's, and every small town has a Falcon Ridge waiting somewhere beyond the lights. As the voiceover fades, the image lingers. A quiet night in the desert. A wind carries dust across an empty road sign reading Falcon Ridge Trail. The stars above are countless, indifferent, eternal, as if to remind us that truth, no matter how long it hides, always finds a way back to the surface. The courtroom is never as loud as the world imagines it. It hums, the air conditioning, the faint scrape of chairs, the shuffle of paper. Truth doesn't shout when it finally arrives. It whispers, because it no longer has to prove itself. By the time the trial of Caroline Dane, Megan Cross, and Evan Dane began, the story of Elaine Rowen had already lived through every headline in Sierra Valle. Yet what unfolded in that quiet courtroom wasn't about spectacle. It was about reconstruction, 3 versions of the same night, now stitched together by fact. Detective Mark Callen sat 2 rows behind the prosecution table. He didn't testify this morning, his part came later, but he wanted to be there, to see how truth behaved once it was out in the open. The prosecutor, Janet Mills, began without theatrics. Her tone was measured, almost gentle. Elaine Rowen was 66. She was loved, independent, and wanted peace in her final years. But she trusted the wrong people, people who confused desperation with entitlement. Her words fell evenly, each one a deliberate step toward the inevitable. She wasn't lost to an accident. She was silenced because her kindness became inconvenient. Callen watched Caroline, hair tied tight, face pale under courtroom lights, sit perfectly still, her hands folded as if in prayer. Megan looked down, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Evan, barely 19, kept his gaze on the floor, the weight of adulthood forced on him too soon. The defense countered predictably, panic, grief, misunderstanding. It wasn't murder, they said. It was chaos, tragedy, and fear. But chaos doesn't buy gasoline. Fear doesn't hide keys or wipe tiles clean. When Callen took the stand, the courtroom seemed to tighten. He wasn't a man for performance, he spoke like someone giving directions on a dark road. He started at the beginning, the missing call, the note in the door, the open back gate. He spoke of the carpet cleaner, the footprint, the gold earring, the faint line of DNA that told more than any confession. At one point, the prosecutor asked, "Detective, in your experience, what does a cleanup like this usually indicate?" Callen's reply was steady. That someone cared more about the appearance of innocence than the weight of truth. He didn't glance toward the defendants. He didn't need to. Truth is like gravity, it pulls on everyone equally. The lab technicians followed. Charts glowed on a projector, chemical analyses, fiber comparisons, GPS pings from cell towers near Falcon Ridge. Ruiz, now promoted to sergeant, gave testimony about the discovery of the earring and the burned mattress. "We didn't need to dramatize it," he said plainly. The evidence spoke for itself. Then came the footage, the blue pickup at Vista Fuel, frozen in time, 3 blurred figures, one standing outside the truck, staring toward the pump. Callen had watched it a dozen times before, but in court it carried a strange intimacy, as if the camera itself were asking, "Why didn't you stop?" Midway through the trial, Megan Cross asked to speak again. Her lawyer tried to dissuade her, but she insisted. The courtroom went still when she took the stand. Her voice shook, but her story didn't. "I didn't mean for her to die," she said. "Elaine came by that Friday. She was calm. She said we had to move out. Caroline said we just needed more time. Then they started yelling. I heard something fall. I ran in, and she was on the floor. Caroline said she slipped. She told me to help. I believed her. But when I came back later, Elaine was gone." "Gone?" the prosecutor asked softly. "She said she took care of it. That we had to clean. That if anyone asked, we hadn't seen her since Friday morning." Her tears weren't for the cameras, they were for herself, the moment she realized silence had cost her everything. As the case unfolded, Caroline's defense leaned on exhaustion, grief, and the weight of losing her husband years before. She wasn't herself, her attorney argued. She acted under emotional collapse. But the jury saw something deeper, not madness, but motive. The eviction, the argument, the cleanup, the trail west. All tied together not by impulse, but by the logic of guilt. The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation. Caroline Dane, guilty of second-degree murder. Megan Cross, accessory to homicide and obstruction of justice. Evan Dane, tampering with evidence, sentenced as a juvenile. When the foreperson read the decision, the room didn't cheer or gasp. It simply breathed. The kind of collective exhale that marks the end of a long-held tension. Callen stayed seated, watching Caroline stare forward without blinking. Megan cried quietly, hands over her face. Evan looked toward the detective for the first time, not with anger, but with the hollow understanding that truth, once spoken, changes everyone it touches. A week later, the case files were archived. The red thread board in Callen's office came down piece by piece. Each photo, each map pin, folded away in a brown box labeled Rowen Case, closed. But the end of a case is never the end of a story. Callen drove out to Falcon Ridge that evening, not out of habit, but to see what silence felt like without a crime behind it. The desert was quiet, golden under the lowering sun. Dust drifted across the road, catching the light like slow rain. He parked near the same patch where the investigators once worked. There was no trace now, no tape, no flags, just a faint depression in the sand where the ground had been disturbed years before. He stood there for a long time, the wind pressing against his jacket. And in that stillness, he thought about the people who filled the margins of every case, the victims who wanted peace, the suspects who mistook need for justification, and the witnesses who carried fragments of truth like shards in their memory. Back at his desk, the precinct quiet, Callen opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote 4 words. Truth leaves no witnesses. He paused, then crossed it out. He wrote again. Truth leaves survivors. Because that was what Elaine's case had become, a story of survival. Not hers, but of everyone left behind learning how to live with what they did, what they saw, or what they ignored. He closed the book and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For detectives like him, every case ends the same way, not with applause, but with the echo of questions that can never be answered. How does a family reach that point? How does love turn into fear? How many small silences does it take to drown a single voice? The only comfort, if there is one, is this: somewhere, someone hears these stories and decides to speak sooner. A month later, a letter arrived at the precinct. No return address, only a neat signature at the bottom, Evan Dane. It read, Detective Callen, I wanted to say thank you. You were right. Truth belongs to whoever faces it first. I'm trying to. I hope someday I can tell the rest of her story without the part where I stayed quiet. E.D. Callen folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the file box before sealing it shut. He turned off the lights, stepped out into the night, and walked past the bulletin board in the hallway, blank now, waiting for the next story to begin. Outside, the desert wind carried dust through the parking lot. The same air that once hid a secret now felt lighter, freer. And in that stillness, the voiceover fades. The truth doesn't vanish when the case closes. It lingers, and echoes, and scars, and lessons whispered to the next person who thinks silence is safer than confession. The camera lingers on the open desert road, a single police cruiser driving away under the fading orange sky. There's a kind of silence that follows every case, not the calm kind, but the kind that hums. It hums in your bones when the evidence is settled, when the verdict is written, and when justice, for all its gravity, still feels incomplete. That silence had settled over Sierra Valle. The trial was over, the cameras had left, and the courthouse parking lot stood empty again. But for Detective Mark Callen, the story of Elaine Rowen wasn't something he could file away. It lingered, like the faint scent of dust and detergent that never quite leaves a room. It was a month after the sentencing when Callen received a letter from Evan Dane, handwritten, small, careful script, the kind of writing that looks like someone learning how to speak again. "Detective, I wanted to tell you. I remember something I didn't before. It's not about guilt. It's about understanding. The day before she disappeared, my grandma told me something strange. She said, 'Evan, if anything ever happens to me, tell them I wasn't afraid.' I thought she meant she was sick. I didn't realize she meant us." Callen read it twice, folded it neatly, and slipped it into his notebook. Some letters were evidence. Others were anchors. The next morning, he drove out to Falcon Ridge Trail one last time, not for work, but for clarity. The desert looked the same as it had months ago, endless golden dust, sagebrush trembling in the wind, and the hum of cicadas filling the air like a pulse. He parked at the same bend where the investigation began, the same place where the burned mattress had been found. There was nothing left now, no markers, no tape, just the echo of movement in an otherwise still landscape. The sky stretched pale blue overhead, and for the first time, Callen felt the story had become a part of the land itself, like the desert had taken it back, piece by piece, until all that remained was a lesson. Back in town, he agreed to meet Laura Pena, a journalist from the Arizona Ledger. She had followed the Rowen case from the start and wanted to write a piece on how justice feels from the inside. They met at a small diner off Route 17, the kind that smells of coffee and fried onions at any hour. She set down her recorder. "Off the record, if you'd rather." "No," Callen said. "You can leave it on. Truth's got nothing to hide anymore." Laura nodded. "You've worked dozens of cases. Why did this one stay with you?" He stirred his coffee. "Because it wasn't about greed. Or revenge. It was about panic. People don't realize how close desperation sits to destruction." She leaned in. "Do you think they planned it?" "Not at first," Callen said. "I think it started with pride, turned into fear, and ended in silence. The most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, it's the moment someone decides they can clean up a mistake." Laura didn't speak for a while. She just listened, a rare skill in her profession. Before leaving, she asked one last question. "If Elaine Rowen could hear you now, what would you tell her?" Callen looked out the window at the desert light spilling across the asphalt. "I'd tell her we listened. Maybe too late, but we did." That night, Callen drove home through the fading light, the horizon bleeding orange into violet. His phone buzzed, a message from Sergeant Ruiz. "You should see this." Attached was a short report, a final lab recheck on the carpet cleaner's tank. Hidden beneath the layers of detergent, lab techs had found a faint chemical trace, lavender oil. Elaine's favorite scent. She used to clean her house with it. For a moment, Callen just stared at the report. It meant nothing in terms of prosecution, but everything in terms of humanity. Even in her final moments, traces of her remained, small, domestic, ordinary. The kind of detail that made her real, not just a victim in a file. A week later, Callen visited Nancy Rowen, Elaine's longtime friend who had been the first to raise the alarm. She lived just outside town, in a modest house lined with wind chimes that caught every passing breeze. Nancy answered the door slowly, her face kind but worn. "Detective, you're still working?" "Just visiting," Callen said, offering a faint smile. Inside, the house smelled of mint tea and old wood. Photos of Elaine still lined the mantel, one of her laughing at a family barbecue, another in her post office uniform, and one older picture where she stood with a young Evan on her knee. "She never threw things away," Nancy said, pouring tea. "Always said memory was cheaper than regret." Callen nodded. "She sounds like someone who understood people better than they did themselves." Nancy sighed. "She tried. But kindness makes you easy to hurt. Especially when it's family." They sat in silence for a long while before Nancy added, almost to herself, "I hope they remember what they did, not just because they were caught, but because they finally saw her for who she was." Callen didn't reply. Some sentences didn't need answers. Later that night, Callen returned to his office. The precinct was quiet, just the buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of an overnight dispatcher. He opened Elaine's case file one last time. Inside were the photos, the rental house, the pickup, the gas station, the note she'd written, and finally, the courtroom. Each image was a frozen breath of the same story, how silence grows teeth. He took out a blank sheet of paper and wrote at the top, "Case study, the weight of silence." Then, below it, "People kill for money, passion, fear. But sometimes they destroy what they love because they can't face what it says about them. Every crime begins as a story no one wants to finish." He set the pen down, closed the file, and finally let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since the first 911 call months ago. The voiceover fades to the sound of the desert wind again. A long shot captures Callen's car driving west along the empty highway, the night sky wide and full of quiet stars. Some stories don't end in courtrooms. They end in people learning to tell the truth, to themselves, if no one else. A small overlay shows Evan Dane's letter resting on Callen's dashboard, edges fluttering slightly in the breeze from an open window. "I hope someday," Evan had written, "I can be the kind of person she thought I was." The camera follows the car as it disappears into the distance, headlights fading, replaced by the rising light of dawn. Justice isn't a finish line, the voice continues. It's a rhythm, a pattern of questions and answers that keeps the world honest. And every so often, when you listen close enough, even silence tells you what you need to hear. The music swells softly, strings and desert wind blending into one another, and the screen fades to black. The human mind has a strange way of remembering. It doesn't hold on to the facts, it holds on to the feelings. And when the facts are gone, all that's left is the echo of what the truth once felt like. For Detective Mark Callen, that echo was Elaine Rowen. Months had passed since the verdict. The town of Sierra Valle had moved on, or at least pretended to. New headlines replaced old ones, new crimes replaced solved ones. But Elaine's story refused to fade completely. It lingered in the small spaces, in whispers at the grocery store, and the slow tone of the mail clerk who still left her box empty out of habit. It was late November when Callen drove out again to Falcon Ridge, not because of duty, but out of instinct. Cases like this didn't end when the file closed, they ended when the silence inside you finally gave up. The desert looked colder now. The summer heat had bled away, leaving pale skies and wind strong enough to carry dust like memory. He parked near the ridge and walked out, the crunch of gravel under his boots the only sound. In his pocket, he carried a folded piece of paper, Evan Dane's second letter, mailed from a youth correctional facility in Santa Fe. "Detective, I've started writing about her, not about what happened, but who she was. I don't know if I'll ever forgive my mom, but I'm trying to forgive myself. I hope you'll read it one day." Callen smiled faintly as he read the words again, then tucked the paper back into his coat. Redemption wasn't something a courtroom decided. It was something people built one honest word at a time. Back in town, Callen stopped at the Arizona Ledger office. Laura Pena, the journalist he'd met months before, waved him in. She looked up from her desk. "You heard?" "Heard what?" "The Ledger's running your case again. This time as a feature, The Detective Who Listened." He gave a dry chuckle. Catchy. It's about perspective, she said. You don't talk like most detectives. You make it sound human. It was human, he said simply. That's what made it so heavy. Laura hesitated, then handed him a printed draft. You might want to read this paragraph before it goes to press. He scanned the lines. Detective Callen believes that justice isn't about punishment, but about restoration, giving truth a place to breathe. He handed it back. You wrote that? She nodded. Keep it, he said. Maybe that's what the world needs to hear. Before he left, she called out, Mark, what made you keep going on this case, after everything? He paused at the doorway. Because Elaine didn't get to. Somebody had to finish the story for her. A week later, Callen received an invitation, handwritten, careful, addressed from Nancy Rowen, Elaine's oldest friend. He drove to her small house on the outskirts of town. When she opened the door, she was holding a photo album. I'm cleaning out her things, Nancy said softly. Thought you should have this. Inside were snapshots of Elaine's life, her smiling in front of the post office, holding a cake on her 60th birthday, sitting beside her husband years before. In the last photo, she stood with young Evan, his arms wrapped around her waist. She believed in people, Nancy said. Even when they didn't believe in themselves. That was her flaw. And her gift. Callen turned the pages carefully. It's strange. We spend so much time reconstructing the crime, we forget to reconstruct the person. Nancy nodded. Maybe that's your next case, remembering people who deserve it. That night, back in his apartment, Callen sat at his desk surrounded by folders, coffee, and silence. He had reopened the Rowen file, not as a detective, but as a man trying to understand where the line between justice and empathy truly lies. He began to write again in his notebook, not a report, but something closer to a eulogy. Elaine Rowen was an ordinary woman whose life became extraordinary because of what it revealed about the people around her. Her death showed us that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it looks like fear, denial, or the inability to say I'm sorry before it's too late. He stopped writing and looked at the ceiling. The city outside was quiet, a still night wrapped in soft orange light from distant street lamps. He realized something then. Detectives don't just solve crimes, they inherit ghosts. Every case leaves behind a shadow that follows them into the next one. And Elaine's shadow wasn't dark. It was light trying to find its way back. 3 months later, in a small county hearing, Caroline Dane made a request, not for parole, but for a recorded statement to be added to the official transcript of the case. Callen was there, standing quietly in the back. Caroline's voice, when she spoke, was thin but steady. I want to say I was wrong. Not because the law says so, because I finally understand it. I told myself I was protecting my family. I was just protecting my pride. I hurt the only person who ever tried to help me. I can't undo that, but I can say her name and not hide from it anymore. She paused. Elaine Rowen. The sound of those 2 words filled the small courtroom like a bell. Callen closed his eyes for a moment. In all his years, he had learned that closure didn't come from sentences or verdicts. It came from someone, anyone, saying the truth out loud. Months later, Callen was transferred to a new division, Major Crimes in Phoenix. But before leaving, he packed his old board into a single box. The final folder he placed inside was labeled simply, Rowen Case, Complete. Before sealing it, he slipped one last note into the file, a personal entry, written in ink, Justice isn't the sound of a gavel. It's the quiet that follows when truth finally has a place to stand. He taped the box shut, turned off the light, and walked out. The final shot opens on Falcon Ridge Trail, months later. The desert is alive again, spring blooms scattered across the sand, yellow and violet wildflowers rising through the dust. A soft wind moves across the hills as the camera pans over a small wooden marker staked in the earth. It reads, Elaine Rowen, remembered in truth. In the distance, a figure walks away, Callen, his silhouette small against the vast expanse of sky. The voiceover returns one last time, calm, steady, reflective. People think detectives chase criminals. We don't. We chase the moments where truth hides, in lies, in fear, in silence. And if we're lucky, every once in a while, we catch up to it. Elaine Rowen's story isn't about death. It's about how truth survives it. The music swells, soft piano and desert wind blending into one. The horizon glows with the first light of dawn. Fade out,